So let me first introduce Mary Binegar, the chair of the OEA-R Advisory Council, to welcome you here this morning. Mary.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm glad that you could make it today. This is our first attempt for one of these meetings. We hope to have several more. I want to just thank you all for giving your time up. I thank you for the panelists that have joined us today. Hopefully they will provide you with a lot of information that will help you as you think about and make decisions, especially in this upcoming election. And we just, please be sure if you have a question to type it into the chat box or to send that text so that your question can be answered. And with that, I will Sylvia to begin our program.
Good morning. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me to share with you this morning. You know, it's always a pleasure to talk to kids in our retirees about what's going on. Because oftentimes you're in DC, you're talking to people who don't necessarily, they're not on the ground and they don't necessarily have a grasp of what's going on the ground and how people on the ground are being impacted by decisions that happen in Washington. And so this morning I want to talk to you about GPO WEP, and I'm going to try to figure out, I'm going to try to share my screen. I'm not too tech savvy when it comes to this whole thing. So let me see if I can share my screen. Share screen. Okay, now I have to find the document. Share. All right, and do this. All right, can you see the screen?
Yes.
Okay, so again, this morning I want to talk to you about the government pension offset and the windfall elimination provision. And I would imagine that many of you on this call understand that these two provisions have had a negative impact on retirees, educators and other public service retirees over the years. And this is not new in terms of NEA's fight on this. We've been lobbying on this for a long time. I've been at NEA for 3 years, but even prior to long before I came to NEA, this was an issue, and the government relations team at NEA is committed to staying in this fight because it's unfair that public servants like yourselves have given so much, and then when it's time to retire, you get hit with this government pension offset or the windfall elimination provision. So let's talk about what they are. So GPO, as we refer to it, it affects almost 700,000 people. And many of these people are low-income people, they're education support professionals. And basically what it does is reduces a person's spousal survival benefit by 2/3 of a public pension. And so some people, almost all of them, 90% of retirees will lose their entire spousal benefit. And so an example, this individual, her husband passed away and she was able to draw some of his Social Security at 60 while she was still working. But she has to keep working in order to draw most of it, because if she retires, she could lose the entire spousal benefit or up to 67% of it. And we think that that is not fair. This is something that came along, I believe, during the Reagan years, and somehow it got posited as retirees who are public servants double dipping. Now, the last time I checked, I don't know anyone who's getting rich off of a public pension or Social Security. And so why Ronald Reagan thought that this was too much money for public servant retirees to have is a mystery to everyone. And then you have the windfall elimination provision that affects almost 2 million people who worked in jobs that weren't covered by Social Security. And again, this is one of those unfair things that came about because it reduces the person's benefit in some cases by half. So if you have somebody who worked another job, maybe at a company, and then decided in their late 30s or mid 30s that they wanted to go back and get a degree and start teaching, and they contributed to Social Security in their other job that they had prior to teaching, and now they're getting ready to retire, or when they retire, they only get half of what they should because they were late starting in teaching and their pension also got reduced. Again, this is unfair. And we are pushing, trying to get this resolved. So you might ask, well, so here's a list of states where educators are not covered by Social Security. And so again, they're the ones who get hit the hardest by this windfall elimination provision in GPO. So you might ask, what is NEA doing about this? Well, there is a bill that gets introduced every Congress. It's called the Social Security Fairness Act, and it will fully repeal GPO and WEP. This year, it was introduced by Rodney Davis, a Republican from Illinois, and Abigail Spanberger from Virginia. Now, in the Senate, Senator Sherrod Brown, I talked to his office before I did this presentation, and I said, hey, is Senator Brown going to introduce the bill again this year? And they were like, absolutely. He's going to keep introducing this bill until GPO WEP are dealt with and put to bed. So you might ask, well, why is it that Congress won't just repeal it? Well, it's according to the Congressional Budget Office, the cost to repeal GPO WEP would be anywhere from $80 to $90 billion in a 10-year window. So we thought last year when the COVID package was abound, well, let's see if we can get it in there, since that was going to be a big bill. And we tried and we were not able to get it into the CARES Act. But again, we'll keep pushing, because at some point we will have a group of people in Congress who think, okay, we need to take this up. And people have asked the question, is it going to be a priority in this Congress? We are going to push for it to be a priority, but the reality is, with everything being about COVID, it's hard to say. So what happened in the last Congress, the 116th Congress, the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee introduced this Public Service Protection and Fairness Act. Now, this was what we consider to be a first step in the right direction, but doesn't go nearly far enough. But basically what it would do, it only addresses the windfall elimination provision. And they would have a new formula. And so current retirees would get about $150 more than they get now. Future retirees would get about $75 more, and no one would get less than what they're getting now. And the reason we supported this bill is because there have been previous WEP-only bills that would create winners and losers. So what do I mean by that? The previous bills that only addressed WEP would have given a bump in a benefit to current retirees of about $100, but then in exchange, it would subject 2 to 3 million future retirees to having to pay into, or having to be penalized by WEP, who currently aren't penalized by WEP. And so we didn't think that was a good deal either. And so we supported this bill because, again, nobody would get less than what they're getting now. And we recognize that it doesn't go nearly far enough, but it has some potential to pass, because the price tag is, I believe, around $30 billion versus the $80 to $90 billion. And so we supported this bill. It has not yet been reintroduced in this Congress, but I checked with the Ways and Means staff, and they told me that Chairman Neal plans to reintroduce it this Congress. So who knows, maybe we can get the WEP-only bill added into a piece of must-pass legislation. And so that's kind of where we are with that. So, you know, basically for you, the bottom line is that, you know, these are penalties, GPO and WEP, and they hurt educators who dedicated their lives to public service. And we have concerns as we move forward because we think about future educators who this could be a deterrent to them. And so we try to educate our new teachers and educators so that they are aware of this, that they might get hit by it. And but the bottom line is we want to see this go away, and any incremental steps that can happen in the meantime, we're going to support those. But our real big push is going to be for full repeal of this awful, awful piece of legislation. And because we do know that, you know, when you dedicate your life to public service, part of that dedication is, you know, your love for what you do. But we feel like that when people dedicate their lives to public service, they deserve a comfortable and secure retirement, and they should not be hit with these penalties at the time when they are moving into that part of their life where their income is potentially drastically reduced. And so with that, I will take any questions that anyone has.
So if you have a question for Sylvia, you can type it in the chat box right now and she'll be able to see it. All the panelists will be able to do that. So if you could do that, if you have a question for Sylvia on the GPO weapon, while we're waiting for questions to come in, I'll just say that, as I mentioned, my mom has lived the story that Sylvia talks about. She retired. My father passed away. He worked and got Social Security, was a Social Security recipient, and her income was clawed back 2/3 of what Dad worked for his whole life. And she's managed, but I mean, this is an issue that costs retirees who were both have spouses who worked in the private sector who passed on before, or who worked in the private sector prior to becoming a public school employee. Let me see if we have a question in the chat. Does this, Sylvia, here's the question. Does this only affect people in the states with independent pensions?
I don't know what you mean by independent.
I believe the ones that where, like Ohio is a state where the public employees are exempt from Social Security.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, I was going to say it only impacts states we call them non-Social Security states. Right. And like in some states, like for example in Georgia, not all of Georgia's state employees are exempt or non-Social Security. It's like in certain counties. So in some states, it's not the entire state, but it might be the county. So you are an educator or public servant for a county, you might get hit with GPO and or WEP. But if you're a state employee, you may not. And so in some states, it's a little bit more granular, and it's at the county, local and county level.
So Sylvia, there's another question in the chat, and it's from Tom Moskovic, and he tells the story of somebody who worked for 48 years, 25 in STR, well, 25 in STRS, 27 in Social Security, the only worker in the family. And the question is, and this must be a question that warms the lobbyist's heart, what do we need to do to get help on this? And she already sent a letter to Senator Brown.
So what you all want to do is, once, Mark, if you will keep in touch with me, and once, well, first of all, there's a new bill on that will fully repeal the GPO and WEP. It's HR 82, called the Social Security Fairness Act, and it's in the House. So whoever's district you live in Ohio, call that member's office, write them, send them an email, call them out on Twitter, call them out on Facebook, and ask them to co-sponsor that bill. Because again, it would fully repeal GPO and WEP, and that's the bill that NEA supports. So that's the first thing you can do. And then as soon as Senator Brown reintroduces the Senate companion of that bill, I would recommend that you reach out to both Senator Brown and Senator Portman. Even though Senator Portman has announced that he's retiring, he still needs to hear from you about this because it is a big deal. Yep, HR 82, Social Security Fairness Act. You're on mute, Mark.
That is so, I thought that was 2020. I guess I'm going to the new year with this. HR 82, correct? And
Yes.
Call your representative to try to get them to co-sponsor that bill to eliminate the GPO. That's the ask. There you go. You know, another one of our participants, I retired with 33 and a half years in education. My spouse worked under Social Security for 38 years, and upon his passing of leukemia, Social Security said that she received nothing of what he had contributed.
And this is a perfect example of the government pension offset, the GPO, the spousal benefit. And again, we think that this is grossly unfair because, you know, public servants, I mean, if you worked and paid into Social Security or your spouse worked and paid in, you should be entitled to that money. I mean, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. It's your money. It's like you're putting money into a system and you're not getting your money back. And it just doesn't make any sense.
No, it doesn't. And it's actually quite, to me, it's a bitter irony that they call it a windfall. That's
exactly, because that's the point I made earlier. I mean, I don't know anybody on Social Security or any kind of government pension who's getting rich. I mean, not even close. And, you know, the whole point of Social Security was to help keep seniors out of poverty at retirement. And interestingly enough, I mean, for some people, you know, if Social Security is their only form of retirement income and then part of that gets snatched back, that's, you know, that's not a good thing. I mean, people don't spend their lives working as hard as people have to work, particularly in the public sector, because I think you all are the hardest working people on the planet. And, you know, and then you get penalized, you get nothing in return. That just doesn't seem fair.
So one of the, when you look at the chat, there are tons of HR 82, which, and it's up in the chat. I'll retype it again. It's House Resolution 82 is the bill that we want our U.S. representatives. But I hear, I'm reading stories like another one of our panelists, or excuse me, participants said they weren't able to collect their husband's benefit and had tried to postpone taking my Social Security, and my husband died in 2014 at 58 years old. Wow. She only did 6 months of his Social Security. Is that representatives need to hear the personal stories of how it actually affects their constituents, and don't assume that this is a partisan issue. This is actually an issue that both representatives on both sides of the aisles, they support repeal. I talked to Dave Joyce, an NEA endorsed representative from Northeast Ohio, and he said, absolutely, I'm in favor of repeal. It affects police and fire as well.
Exactly. So, and I'm glad you raised that, Mark, because that is so on point. Your stories matter, and your stories move members of Congress more than data in many instances. And you're right, this is a bipartisan issue. And, you know, the thing that seems to also move the needle with Congress is for them to understand, and you just putting it out there, that if you don't have money to spend as a retiree, you can't help the local economy because you are struggling to make ends meet. And so you want to have money to put back into the local economy. And yeah, so share your stories. I mean, for Julia, please share your story. Kathleen, I recommend and ask that you both would share your stories. Like I said, send an email to that member of Congress with your story and talk about the importance of, you know, fixing this, because it negatively impacts not only you as an individual, but the entire community. Because if people don't have money to spend in the local economy, you know, that hurts the local economy as well.
Absolutely. We're going to wrap this up. I think we have a clear ask, Sylvia.
Yeah.
Is call your U.S. representative and ask them to support HR, not only support, but co-sponsor HR 82. I want to thank you, Sylvia, for bringing light to the subject once again. I think it's something to keep on the front burner and to have people continue to put pressure on our representatives in Congress to change. So appreciate you coming in this morning and joining us.
Sure, and before I go, I will say that this is an issue that Sarah Borgman is keenly aware of. And so you won't be alone in weighing in with your members of Congress because, like I said, I'm presenting to Sarah's group tomorrow afternoon. And so the NEA retired legislative committee and the entire NEA retired, they will be weighing in on this as well because, you know, it's an issue in those other states. And so you won't be alone in this, and I will keep pushing this, as will the collective NEA. So again, thank you for inviting me, and I'm off to my next meeting for the day. But
thank you so much, Sylvia.
Absolutely, thank you.
Hope to talk to you later.
Okay, bye.
Yes.